This week on Danica Raven's Bitesize Horror, I'm joined by special guest Dale Alexander Denton. Thank you for coming in today.
You're very welcome.
So today you're going to be discussing short horror and just writing horror in general with us, aren't you?
Hopefully, yeah.
Excellent. Well, on the last episode, you did a reading for us.
I did.
That was The Enemy of Time.
Yes.
So what inspired you to write that part of that piece?
Well, I have a fascination with vampires. I've always wanted to tell a vampire story. And the story came about with my struggles with religion. And, when I was young, school, assembly, you would pray and all that. And it was a part of my life growing up, I suppose. But I was never much of a believer, I guess you could say. My gran was Christian. But it's just a small thing that's been there, but never been a major thing. If it's real, it's real. If it's not, it's not. Never much cared about it to any great degree. But in recent years especially, I've come to really have major issues and frustrations with religion. Not so much belief, but the idea of institutionalized religions. And I really want to convey that frustration in some form. And it's a vampire story, and I guess the quote-unquote hero, the priest, Father Henry, is chasing after a monster, the vampire, who claims itself as God. And I really wanted to kind of convey a kind of dichotomy, like who is the real monster, because especially the Christian church over the centuries has done some monstrous acts, and I wanted to kind of suggest that in some form. And even the title itself, The Enemy of Time, initially you would think it's the vampire, but I feel in the modern day the church could be looked in that light as well. I'm probably being very controversial right now, but
Well, in Britain, religion's a big thing that's ingrained in society, but also in vampire stories, religion always plays a really big element.
Very much so.
Sometimes with, them being out and out allergic to crucifixes, or just having a general disdain for religion for whatever reason. So, I mean, is that why you picked the vampire specifically? Because they're predominantly more so than other monsters? The sort of enemy of religion, as it were.
Yes, definitely. They are a kind of polar opposite, a great nemesis, as it were. You always want a good kind of rivalry in a story. But yes, plus I love vampires, like Dracula, come on. Oh.
And vampire and priest, classic combo,
Very much so.
But this time you have your vampire actually coming into the church, and it doesn't seem to affect her in the slightest.
And she claims herself to be the very god that he worships, which just breaks him completely. And I want to explore that. I don't know if I pulled it off well, but it is what it is.
Well, you'll have to check out last week's episode if you haven't already to check if you did. Let us know in the comments.
Yes. Give me all your hate feedback. Yeah.
But on another note, we also had another one of your stories in the show that I read out last month, which was RPG.
Yes.
Well, why don't you tell us a bit about that, because that's very different from The Enemy of Time.
I'm very fond of RPG. It's one of my favourite stories I've written. I wrote RPG back in 2016 when I was at university. I was part of the Creative Writing Society up in Aberdeen, and I got writing a story. I was fascinated by the idea of reincarnation. I always have been. And I want to tell something about it. And I like the idea of there's so much to do in life. There's so many books to read, films to watch, places to visit, people to meet. There's so much to do that realistically it's almost impossible to experience everything in life in one lifetime. So I became consumed by the idea of what if someone could live more than one lifetime? What if someone could theoretically experience everything to become a kind of perfect idea of humanity? And it got me, and I wanted to explore it more. And I used the idea of life as a game, and so the kind of gaming motif got incorporated. And then I needed a villain, of course.
Yes.
The developer.
The villain really gets me because I really enjoyed the villain. The first time I read the story, I kind of looked at it as a sort of Cheshire Cat type creature because you've got the sort of the grin, and it's not a fully formed sort of creature, if you'll get me. But what helped you come up with the idea of it? Because it's a very sort of unique monster in appearance and in what it does.
There was definitely a few inspirations for the developer. Physically, he's a kind of Slenderman type idea. Slenderman wasn't a big inspiration, but physically there is a similarity with the kind of tall, thin, pale idea, no eyes, etc. Alice in Wonderland, the Cheshire Cat, was definitely in there. It was in my mind because ultimately the main character is going for a kind of Wonderland type scenario, in a sense. One of the big inspirations for the developer was anime, actually.
Yeah.
I'm a big anime fan, and there's an anime called Assassination Classroom, and a character called Koro Sensei, who is kind of, he's this big tentacle kind of teacher, and his appearance is interesting because he's this big yellow smiley face. He just has this like giant grin, and that image stuck with me. And so the developer physically is a Slenderman like creature, but I like the idea of this grin that never moved, never went away. It was just,
because it is very unnerving.
Yeah.
Whenever you get a fixed expression, I mean, mascots, clowns, all sorts like that, if they've got a painted on, yeah, I know, right?
Oh.
It's because the painted on, the fact that or that it's a fixed expression just makes it, I don't know, false. Lack of expression is really unnerving, and that comes across.
Instinctually, you know it's a facade, and there's something else underneath. Literally underneath, because his real mouth is, not quite as pleasant.
Yes.
And personality-wise, I say in the story, he's very much a game show host. He's like a psycho Bradley Walsh on The Chase. But then again, Bradley Walsh himself, maybe a bit psycho.
Is it horror specifically that you tend to write, or do you tend to write a bit of a mixture?
It's interesting. I wasn't actually a horror fan until a few years ago. Don't crucify me. Well, no, just growing up in my home, my mum did not allow horror. Not in her household. No. I do not have that. Keep that filth away. So yeah, I never grew up with horror.
It was after you moved out then?
When I became old enough, I kind of, when I was in college, I kind of just developed this love because I had to write a few things for college, and I don't know, I got the addiction, like I absolutely fell in love with the genre.
Was it just a new understanding of the genre sort of
Yeah,
thing?
because I'd always kind of, it's a bit silly to look back on it now, but I always kind of looked at horror kind of pretentiously. I was like, oh, it's a lazy genre,
Well, with all the jump scare that was out, a few years ago, I would give you that. I think that for a little while was true. You had to dig a little bit more to get a story that had a little bit more bite out of it,
But there's some amazing, and I've went back through books and films, and especially films. I've consumed like a great portion of the horror films that. Despite the bad rap they get, I love slasher films.
Yeah.
Like, Halloween is my jam. When I was a kid, I saw, not the original, but Halloween 4. Halloween 4 and 5 back to back.
Is Season of the Witch? Or?
That's free.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes.
Don't talk about free.
I've been told not to watch it, so I managed to hold off.
Weird film. Weird film. Not good weird, I don't think, either.
So would you say Halloween is your all-time favourite horror story? I mean, film and book, whatever, any sort of horror story, would you say that is your ultimate favourite?
I do love Michael Myers as an icon, but I wouldn't. No, my favorite film of all time. Well, except Star Wars, because Star Wars is the wife, But aside from Star Wars, because Star Wars is special, my favorite film ever made is Alien.
Yes.
Ridley Scott's original Alien.
Good choice, good choice.
I'm one of the few that prefer Alien over Aliens.
For me, they're on level ground.
Oh, yeah.
I love them both, but separately.
Both masterpieces, but Alien's just got something special to it for me. And
Well, would you ever consider writing sci-fi horror?
I have written sci-fi horror. In
Yes.
fact, Alien was a direct inspiration for a short story that, I say short, it's actually one of my longer ones, in my upcoming book, which is kind of, I won't go into it too much, but very kind of existentialist space horror idea. Very alien and very Alien meets Blade Runner.
Excellent.
Yeah. Ironically, both Ridley Scott.
But tell us a bit more about your book. When is your new book coming out?
Hopefully in a few months. I'm aiming for mid to late May release, and it's my first time self-publishing, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, hopefully well. It'll be on Amazon.
Yes.
On paperback and ebook, and yeah, it's called The Screams of Silent Souls.
So roughly how many stories have you got in there?
Last count 12, but it's looking like it's going to be 13.
Is it a bit of a mixture? I mean, is it, you know,
It's a bit of
a running
horror.
theme or?
It's a bit of horror, it's a bit of sci-fi, a bit of romance. I like a bit of romance, don't judge me. Kind of existential nihilistic philosophy, because I'm pretentious like that.
At least you can admit it.
Yes. If I don't smile, I cry. Which ironically is kind of the theme of the book. It's a bunch of stories just being kind of melancholic view of life and death, love and loss, and everything in between. Yeah.
Excellent.
Again, really pretentious.
Well, is pretentious horror your favourite kind of horror?
Oh yeah, love it.
Do you find it different reading horror to writing horror? Like, is there, do you have a different aspiration for your own work, or do you compare it to another author? Do you try to avoid writing like another author?
I do. Like, I try and get not a style, but a kind of tone, a vibe I'm going for. Like, I listen to music a lot, and I'll get a song in my head that kind of sums up the kind of, I'm not sure how to describe this, but this kind of idea in my head that the song is the kind of tone I want to aim for when I write a story. But I don't try to ape other people's styles. I kind of like to stick to my own thing. I tried it once and I really didn't like it. Yeah.
Well, do you have any advice for anyone watching this who would be interested in getting into writing?
Alcoholism.
Alcoholism.
Yes, that's the life of a writer, boys and girls. Just crippling loneliness and spiraling addiction. Yeah.
Is this just all horror, or is this all types of writing?
All types of writing, yeah. Not even just writing, just life, just
Alcoholism. Stick to the bottle, guys. That's where your creativity should come from.
No, in all seriousness, I would recommend always trying new things. Like, it may seem strange, but everyone gets blocked from time to time as a writer, and despite what some may say, you know who you are. Always try new things, like even if it's just taking a walk and going to a street that you've never been before, watching a different type of film or listening to a different type of song that you're not used to, just something new, like, 'cause it's usually, at least for me, it helps jumpstart something.
Being open to new things.
Yes, it gets the creative spark. Again, anime, I'm a big anime fan, and I always find watching a new anime usually help, because Japan's very creative, and even if it's something weird and something I normally wouldn't be into, usually there's ideas in anime that are like, well, that's different, and it gets me thinking, and so that's my personal kind of
Prevent you from getting bogged down in just classic tropes.
because you can't get too stuck in your own head and too stuck in other people's heads, and you just go round in circles. So always try break that mold and kind of just experience something new, even if it's not your thing. It's a very bland answer, I know, but
No. Do you find it easier writing short stories as opposed to full length?
yes and no. With a full length novel, I've been writing a full length novel for about 8 years now. It's nowhere closer to completion. I'm a perfectionist.
That's got to be driving you insane.
It is. it's like a fantasy thing, and I'll have one line about some king from like 900 years ago, but then I need to go back and develop this character and his lineage and where he was born, where he died, what battles, and yada yada. And it's only like one, maybe 2 lines, and that's been 8 years of that. So yeah, and that explains the alcoholism. But yeah.
So do you just use short stories as a wee escape from this epic that you're attempting?
They certainly don't take as long, but at the same time, I can't get as attached to them, if that makes sense. Like, I know my characters in my novels.
It's harder to get immersed in a short one, is it?
Yeah, I tend not to be as character focused with short stories. It's more concept or atmosphere, or theme. Whereas with my longer prose, it's very much the characters, like getting inside their heads, but I don't tend to do that as much with short stories. So it's take some, leave some.
Would you recommend any short stories or just horror novels?
Well, there's a book coming out called The Screams of Silent
Oh
Souls.
yes, obviously there's that. We can't miss that.
Shameless plug. I do love a bit of Lovecraft, I must admit. He's a terribly problematic racist, but it can't be denied he's a great writer. And I remember reading Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness for the first time, and it just blew me away because they're just masterful pieces of work. And yeah.
I found that Lovecraft has spoiled me for other writers. I mean, for example, when I see something like Stephen King's It,
Yes.
I see a trans-dimensional creature who reminds me of other creatures from Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And you can't help but see all these other authors being inspired by the same source, which always seems to be Lovecraft.
He definitely had a ripple in the lake, as it were. That just, even if you can't help it, you're going to be reverberated by Lovecraft in some way, because he just helped define the genre. And yeah. But a terrible racist.
Nobody's perfect.
No.
And it doesn't mean we're not going to post any stories in here that are done by terrible racists. However, a lot of that was supposed to do with the times as well that it was written. And it does come across in these stories if you're looking for that. But if you're not looking for that and you're looking for it just in face value, it is just monsters from the sea.
True.
But you think that is just where his fear of the sea came from, was all the people coming over on boats?
Unfortunately, it happened to affect a lot of famous writers. I mean, Bram Stoker as well.
Yep.
Infamously, Dracula is a metaphor for immigration.
And the diseases that come with it,
Yeah.
like vampirism.
So, just classical literature, racism and sexism. It's just.
Well, if you don't have a bit of a mixture, you end up with all your books the same.
I know.
A lot of people talk about boycotting stories if they don't agree with the writer's point of view. What do you feel about
that? Me from like a year or two ago would probably have a different answer to this now. I always used to be separate the art from the artist. Even if the artist is, I was about to swear there, a bad person.
Yeah. Like you get painters on death row, for example.
You should always take the work for the work itself. But recent times, I struggle with that these days. Like, personally, it's hard for me to watch a Kevin Spacey film these days, for example. Which, again, you should try and separate the art from the artist, but it's very difficult these days.
These days, everybody's private life, though, is so public because of the internet.
Yes.
I mean, it's different when you look at classic literature back in the day. I mean, there's all sorts of studies and things on that now, and you hear all these stories in hindsight and all that. But when it comes to modern artists, I think there's a lot more scrutiny. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there, but I'm saying that it does maybe have a different turn on it. I mean, do you think you would end up rather reading work from someone from years ago that was known as a racist rather than reading work of a new author that's a racist?
I think so, yes, because I've read Dracula, I've read Lovecraft, and I love them, and many other examples. But then there's, have you heard of Ender's Game?
Yes.
by Orson Scott Card. Not a racist that I know of, but incredibly homophobic writer. And yeah, I've been put off reading his stuff because of that. And yeah, I suppose it is. If I knew a modern writer who had such, backwards beliefs, I probably wouldn't read their stuff now,
Okay.
no matter how well reviewed it was. So I suppose I can't really separate the art from the artist. I'm a major hypocrite. Yes.
As you know, I'm a big fan of films and I do a good bit of acting myself. Have you got any horror films that you'd like to recommend, other than Halloween?
Well, I mean, everyone should watch Halloween, even the bad ones, because
Even the third one?
well, that doesn't have Michael Myers in it, so it doesn't even count, does it?
Okay, so except the third one. So
You know who you are. There's a really great film called that I'm a fan of called Stoker by the filmmaker Park Chan-wook. Fantastic filmmaker. He's Korean, and it's how to describe it? It's not about Bram Stoker.
no.
It's about a young girl. It's essentially the origin story of a serial killer, and yeah, Park Chan-wook just has an excellent eye for atmosphere and cinematography, and it's an utterly gorgeous, dark, twisted film to watch, and I love it. I love it so much. Yeah.
Excellent. So is that mostly a build of suspense in the way that he does it?
Yeah, and it's just it's watching warped minds just kind of bloom like a flower, which is a really weird way to describe it, but it's kind of beautiful to watch.
Yeah. Right, so I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much for coming on the show and coming and having a wee word with us.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
It's been fabulous.
Right, so can you tell our audience where can they find you online? Where can they keep in touch with your work? And where can they find your new book?
You can find me on Twitter at the Denton one. It's not much except politics and me shipping my favourite fictional characters. So. And you can find my new book, The Screams of Silent Souls, on Amazon, on ebook and paperback.
Be sure to check back next week for another episode of Danica Raven's Bitesize Horror. And remember that if you want a piece of your own work read out on the show, please just send it in to us.